So we're gonna do that. Enable our live transcript as well. Great. Welcome in, everybody. Welcome in. I'm just asking you to throw your name in the chat or where you're coming from in the chat. Great. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Stewart's Opera House's hosting of Spoken and Heard. My name is Devin Sudman. I am the Education Director here at Stewart's. Today I'm wearing a hat, but I have curly black hair, light brown skin, and dark brown eyes. I'm wearing a black t-shirt and a black hat and black thick brim glasses, getting in the mood of spooky season. And I'm excited to be here. Stewart's Opera House is committed to our mission to be a regional leader in the arts community, a center for public expression, and an economic development partner for Southeast Ohio. We acknowledge that our historic theater sits on the traditional homelands of the Shawnee, Adena, and Hopewell peoples. We recognize the ever-present systemic inequities that stem directly from painful history of colonization, and we commit ourselves to respecting and reconciling this long history of injustice. Stewart's is committed to being more intentional in the role we play for racial justice. We also commit to being more inclusive of people historically and currently marginalized based on identity, including gender, sexuality, class, and heritage. We wish to publicly express that hate and systemic oppression have no home in our organization. In a few moments, I'll be dropping a donation link in the chat for Stewart's, and you can also visit our website to find out more about our upcoming events and educational opportunities. Now, this evening, I'll be monitoring the chat as well as keeping an eye on the YouTube stream. So I'll be fading into the background. But now, for what's most important, I want to introduce Kari Gunter-Seymour, your host for the evening. Kari Gunter-Seymour is the Poet Laureate of Ohio. Her poetry collections include Alone in the House of My Heart, Ohio University, Swallow Press, 2022, and A Place So Deep Inside America, A Place So Deep Inside America, It Can't Be Seen, Sheila Nagig Editions, 2020. Winner of the 2020 Ohio Poet of the Year Award. Her work has been featured on Verse Daily, Cultural Daily, World Literature Today, and the New York Times, and Poem a Day, a ninth generation Appalachian, 9. She is the editor of I Thought I Heard a Cardinal Sing, Ohio's Appalachian Voices, funded by the Academy of American Poets and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and the Women of Appalachia Project's anthology series, Women Speak. Gunter-Seymour is a retired instructor in the E.W. Scripps School of Journalism at Ohio University, an artist in residence at the Wexner Center for the Arts, and a Pillars of Prosperity Fellow for the Foundation of Appalachian Ohio. Impressive nonetheless. It is so great to have you with us, Kari.
Oh, thank you, Devin. Thank you, and all the fine folks at Stewart's Opera House for having all of us in this evening. And thanks to all of you joining us tonight and all of you who will join us as you stream our program from Stewart's YouTube page and my personal Facebook and Twitter pages. And that'll be available right after our event tonight. Also, a really special thanks to our ASL interpreters tonight, Allie and Joe. They work their fine magic as they dance our words. And I want to thank you, Devin, for setting up, I call it closed captioning, but I think it's really called something else, but you can click on that for transcripts if you would like to see the words that we are saying as well. So I am a pale-skinned woman with long, straight, blondish gray hair, if I'm being honest. I wear glasses and the rims are tinted dark green. And tonight I'm wearing a lilac colored t-shirt with lace trim. My backdrop is botanical, and as the evening wears on, by no fault of my own, but totally by circumstances, my lighting becomes a little moody. And this is our first event for fall 2022, and I'm very excited. So I'm going to read a wee poem tonight of my own to get us started. This is from my brand new collection that just kind of came out in the last couple of weeks. It's still in pre-sale. It's called Alone in the House of My Heart. And I will put that link along with all of our guests' books in the chat window tonight. And I'll also be telling you where you can find those. And mine happens to be from Ohio University Press. So this is to no one in particular. I'm never happy to see summer go. Earth stripped of its finest voice. I'm sitting outside in my heavy coat, porch light off. There is no moon, no ambient distractions. The sky a Zion. I take solace in considering the age of this valley, the way water left its mark on Appalachia long before Peabody sunk a shaft, Chevron augured the shale, or ODOT dynamited roadways through steep rock. I grew up in a house where canned fruit cocktail was considered a treat. My sister and I fought over who got to eat the fake cherries. Standouts in the can, though tasting exactly like every other tired piece of fruit floating in the heavy syrup. But it was store-bought, like city folks. And we were too gullible to understand the corruption in the concept. Our mother's home canned harvests superior in every way. I cringe when I think of how we shamed her. So much here depends upon a green cornstalk, a patched barn roof, weather, the Lord, community. We've rarely been offered a hand that didn't destroy. Inside the house, the light bulb comes on when the refrigerator door is opened. My husband rummages a snack, plops beside me on the porch to wolf it down, turns, plants a kiss, leans back in his chair, says to no one in particular, a person could spend a lifetime under a sky such as this. Oh, Autumn, how you taunt me. Oh, my goodness. So we'll have a short Q&A after the readings, and I want everyone to feel free to type your question into the Q&A or in the chat window later as well, if you care to. But now I think we will begin. Mark Danowsky is editor-in-chief of One Art, a journal of poetry. He is the author of As Falls Trees, Night Ballet Press, and John, Moonstone Press. A short collection, Violet Flame, is forthcoming from Tiny Wren Lit. His work has appeared in many fine journals, including Birdwatcher's Digest, Gargoyle, The Healing Muse, and North Dakota Quarterly. So Mark and I have never met face to face, and we all know how that is these days. Many of us have great friendships that have developed on social media, mostly due to the pandemic and somewhat due to distance. But he has published my work, and through those interactions, and then others I've observed on social media, I can tell you this, that Mark is a kind, hardworking poet who goes out of his way to create opportunities for other poets. He's the kind of editor that takes time to share his thoughts and comments about the work. And we all know that is rare and so very special. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Mark Danowsky. Mark?
Hey, Kari. Thank you so much for having me. Wow, that was a beautiful, touching introduction. Still taking that in. I loved your reading just now, since this is actually the first time tonight that I've had an opportunity to hear your voice. That's always exciting. So delighted to be here, and thank you to Stewart's Opera House and to all our featured readers, and I'm just happy to be here, and I will go ahead and read some poems now. So the first poem that I'm going to read tonight is entitled Displacement. Displacement. 2 weeks before we receive the eviction notice, I walk our dog early for a Sunday. Since the weather has just taken a turn, I'm underdressed and instantly eager to retreat indoors where coffee awaits. Curbside, in front of our place, I hear a sound that is distinctly watery. The dog appears to busy himself, using his most finely tuned sense to determine an eastern bluebird's time of death. While I scan the hilly terrain in search of sound, almost to my surprise, I discover the source: starlings, taking turns bathing in a second-story gutter not 30 feet away. I motion to the dog to witness, but he declines in favor of further bluebird analysis. Alone, I watch each starling splash produce a sprinkler effect, displacing water in a way that seems particular, and I suspect has to do with weight and wingspan. The next poem is from the same time period. It's entitled Evicted. Normally, I would not think to approach the possum, seeing it eating the dog treats left by the kitchen door earlier for the possum, the raccoons, but mostly we've been seeing the 2 possums lingering by the trash can outside the kitchen door, where outside visitors come to see our mammoth cat, though the cat cares little for the possums, in spite of attempts to direct his attention. Now, I walk in the yard with the dog. Seeing the possum eating the dog treats, or perhaps cracking and munching a few black oil sunflower seeds left for the birds in theory, and the red fox squirrels who eat lively with quick little paws. Now I walk in the yard with the dog. The safety light floods the still, flushed woods, and I consider an approach to see if the possum would play dead for a passing thought I know I should let pass, though I make myself picture a possible face of the possum playing dead, because if I scared it, because what could I be but a threat? So this next poem is a little bit on the longer side, certainly a long poem for me. And it's from during the time, those first two poems as well. I wanted to have a bit of a focus tonight on poems from my time in Appalachia. And so I lived in West Virginia, in north central West Virginia, Morgantown area for 5 years or so. And for a couple years, I was a rideshare driver for Uber and Lyft. And so that's where this poem comes out of. So this is excerpt from Apology Tour. And it's got an epigraph from Whitesnake for all those people who still know who Whitesnake is. Here I go again on my own, going down the only road I've ever known. Like a drifter, I was born to walk alone. And I've made up my mind, I ain't wasting no more time. The night wants nothing from me. The night needs nothing from me, I tell myself again. The young man in my car tells me, if you're not under the influence, it's just hope, boundless hope. On our way to retrieve his impounded Subaru with expired tags, he continues, under the influence, you recede into a space where you can address reality, past, all the bad things, without dwelling hopelessly. On the in-store Muzak, they're unironically playing What About Love? I can't sell you what you don't want to buy. Unlike AI, we are limited by scale. A man in the supermarket walks by. On the back of his black t-shirt in white lettering, the words, when in doubt, empty the magazine. They say never go to bed angry, but when you're alone, no one is present to say never go to bed depressed. On break, I learn what others in service are up to. A joke about throwing something I pretend I mishear, say, didn't you say you throw them on the grill? Internal sigh of relief that I receive in unscripted response. That's right, we believe in capital punishment here at McDonald's. Last time I had a shift at Walmart, I left something behind, walked across the store from my workstation to where we keep our supplies in the warehouse, 371 steps one way. On the phone, I overshare this thought about growing up with rich people, then going on to be treated poorly. Then going on to be treated badly by poor people. On the drive to therapy, I noticed new signs, machine gun rentals. Quick math, Sandy Hook was 6 years ago this December. It shows this poem's a couple years old. A regular tells me he bow hunts from a seated position, has a chair that swivels 360 degrees. Turn real slow, he explains. He tells how he puts salt licks out to draw game in. I learn his friend butchers for free. An insider tells me they lie to customers about the birds. Shoppers want to know what happens to the birds of Walmart. Protocol is to tell concerned shoppers that they're captured and released. Really though, early mornings they'll briefly close the otherwise 24-hour store, and a low-level employee will go around with a pellet rifle, gunning down house finches, sparrows, whatever flies by. Henry Ford may have once said, If two men drive more than 40 miles together, they inevitably establish a certain level of camaraderie. On a long drive with a Nigerian student, eventually he says, people would kill to be poor in America. The ground hornet lands on the fence post with bird-like precision. I tell another guy I'm Ubering about a job I know about, working for the local ambulance company, 24 hours on, 24 hours off. No one gets why it has to be that way. At the store for locals, a mom yells at her daughter, maybe 4 years old. You need to control your urges, woman. This is also a tale from my time at Walmart, which I recommend to people, especially if you've grown up around a certain level of privilege. You can humble yourself and learn a bit about what everybody else is doing by spending some time at Walmart. Bird in a box. Before I worked there, I saw a bird in the Walmart rafters while browsing seed for my feeders. I went to the hardware aisle, retrieved a 28-cent box cutter, and slid across. Subtle, I motioned to the bird. See how I try? Rideshare. Passengers offer confession. There is never enough time for absolution. So we focus on the mutual. Magnets worried, wrong turns could repel. Smoothness is to godliness. One of us offers an olive branch ripe with opportunity. A trip that went awry. We can stay gold now, trotting lightly over details. I skirt the tyranny of silence. Fruit bowl. Staple of the classic still life. Oranges, bananas, apples. What else? Pears, maybe. Perhaps some grapes dangling over the edge, close to the dark table. Probably mahogany or cherry. I'm trying to recall the last time we had a fruit bowl. I know the answer is never, but we did have that black chandelier type thing 3 or so apartments ago. I remember sitting apples on it and letting them gather dust. Green Granny Smith apples with a coat of dust. It's worse now, knowing about what dust is. I had at least 500 different people in my car in the past 6 months, and you wonder why I feel I don't own anything. Not my things, my time, certainly not the future I'm so ready to live. This is actually when I was still driving rideshare, but I had returned to the Philadelphia area. Passing through southeastern Pennsylvania towns in winter. Wawa set to Route 52 South out towards Mushroom Country. I drive a stranger's family, oldest son riding shotgun. Warm winter through the car's speakers, a stag darts, rack gone magnificent, starburst by high beam glare. Could have flipped us through the wire. We trudge on past Lenape Road, wind and wind, feeling the elevation on a one-way road called 2. Earlier, Nantmeal Township, then a chopped grain field entering Lyonsville, shades of beige, all the space filled in with geese, God knows how many. It's sunny outside today, first in 3. I want to say sub-zero temps, but most towns within 25 miles offer a light flurry. In Nantmeal, trees stilled by ice, the gleam of bare branches staggers. I roll the window down, to photograph frozen wine vines. Roads open up out here, the air more crisp, quiet. It seems easier, hours still, before dusk. Just 2 more poems. Both of these are actually fairly recent. At night I live. At night I live in too close quarters with loved ones I've lost. Old friends drag me places I don't want to go. I open a fridge that might as well be empty. The lost sock in the washer meets the detritus of solitude. Blurred months turn years, turn brief joys in the face of chronic trauma. I spar with demons who file complaints with razor-sharp nails. I say every meal is hot, like too hot. And no dessert for me, please. Not ideal, but near permanent Lent, where you give up more and more. I call it minimalism, aware my behaviors are disordered. I make choices like anyone, so calling myself essential is a laugh. Call me a sellout or fraud all day, while I keep my eyes wide open. New words are always on the horizon. If I wait long enough, they arrive. Picture your hero descending a mountain, holding the next right commandments. Blessings are needed for now. Words to wield like an Olympic torch. And here's the last one. This is Dead Man's Shoes. I wore a dead man's shoes. My father laughed when I told him. He said, "Guess you're not superstitious." I have my moments. This was about money, of course. The widow put up an ad, "I'm a sucker for deals," or the show. Free is hard to conceive. They say that all shoes have about 500 miles on them, no matter the make. I wore the dead man's shoes a month or 3, I hope no longer. Shoes are like tires, the way an umbrella is not exactly permanent shelter. Fact is, no one else's shoes ever fit quite right. I hope someone will desire to wear my shoes, even briefly, when I am gone. Thank you.
Could you
Mark.
1 second while I wrap up that last poem? Okay, thank you. 1 second. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Joe. See what I mean about magical and dancing words? I was not kidding when I said that. Well, Mark, I had to just say a couple things about your beautiful work, and I wrote down a few notes to myself here as you were reading. Starting out, your work is very visual, and one of the first things I caught is you're talking about being evicted. Each starling splash produced a sprinkler effect, and I was thinking, have we all not seen that very scene where the birds are splashing and just having a wonderful time? And it made me think about you as a person writing about something as dramatic as eviction. And even though we'll say the narrator, not you, But even as the narrator is going through the agony of eviction, they manage to find solace in studying birds and animals and listening to nature. And then you shared with us that you were spending time in Appalachia when you wrote these poems. So I guess I'm not that surprised that that's where you went, that you found solace there. But the other thing, there were a couple other things that really got me. Of course, when you tell us as an insider at Walmart that the employees at Walmart lie about the birds, because I've noticed the birds many times at our local Walmart and our local Kroger store, and I always wonder about that. And then you tell us that the protocol is to say that they're captured and released. In reality, they're shot with a pellet gun, and that just gutted me. But then in the next poem, you're telling us that you just went in, got a big bag of seed and slid it open so that the birds could come in and sneak it away. I just loved that. And I loved your insider stories about your Uber days as well. I thought that was wonderful that customers treat you like you're, a confessional, which is what often happens to bartenders. And I never thought about something like that happening to Uber drivers. So thank you for all of that. It's really wonderful, Mark. Thank you so, so much for being with us tonight and sharing your beautiful work. Rita Quillen's novel Wayland is a sequel to Hiding Ezra, published by Iris Press in 2019, was the March 2022 bonus book of the month for the International Pulpwood Queens and Timber Kings Book Club. She also has a new and selected poetry collection, Some Notes You Hold, that's from Madville Press, and was published in 2020. Her full-length poetry collection, The Mad Farmer's Wife, published in 2016 by Texas Review Press, which is a Texas A&M affiliation, was a finalist for the Weatherford Award in Appalachian Literature. And for those who you don't know, that is one of the finest awards that can be won for Appalachian literature. She was one of 6 finalists for the 2012-14 Poet Laureate of Virginia. She lives, farms, writes songs, and takes photographs at Early Autumn Farm in southwestern Virginia. And again, Rita and I have built this relationship via social media, and I am a huge fan of her, and I love everything about her. But I think what I especially love about her, there are so many things, but this one thing that just gets me in my gut every time is that every summer she sets aside a good chunk of time for Camp Mama. I love that. I almost get tears in my eyes when I think about it. And there's no use trying to contact her during that time because she simply cannot be persuaded to give up that precious time with her grandchildren. And I so value that. She is an amazing novelist and poet, and I am over the moon to have her with us this evening. Please welcome Rita Quillen.
Oh my gosh, that's so sweet, Kari. Thank you so much. And all of those kind words right back at you. You are an amazing life force. And I'm so glad that social media has allowed me to be introduced to you and to know your work. That's wonderful. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us, especially thank you to the interpreters. I used to teach very often. The hearing impaired students were given to me because I taught in developmental education. I started my career there. So I'll try to remember and talk slow enough. I'm a little bit out of practice. I'm going to read to you tonight from the two poetry books that Kari mentioned. The first one's called Some Notes You Hold, and it was inspired, unfortunately, by the very sad and sudden loss of my father. And like so many poets of my age group, of course, that was the first thing I did, was to get over some of that grief and loss, was to sit down and write about him. But I didn't want to write just your typical sort of sad eulogies. I wanted to think of him too as an icon of his generation and of his time and place. And I also wanted to have enough time and distance to capture some of the humor of him, because we're a very funny, crazy family, and he would have wanted that. So I'll start off with the first poem in the book, tries to capture some of that humor about one of his many quirks. And it's called The Gospel of Junior. And it opens with a little prologue that gives you all of the commandments of this book of Junior, if it had been written out. And then the poem starts after. The Gospel of Junior. The book of Junior was economical, only needing a half dozen commandments. Gardening is a sacrament. Your tithe paid with hoe and bent back. Keep everything godly clean. Keep the Sabbath, no matter what the hayfield says. In fact, go to church every time the door opens, but don't crow about it. Your life will tell the tale. Most of all, don't throw things away. Everything, all of it, is a gift. My dad's dime store dungeon of detritus down in his dark basement was a wonder. Nothing escaped him. Not the broken or rusty, the warped or the worn. Dozens of nails driven in joists held bags of treasure, screws, nails, nuts, and bolts, belts, brackets, brushes, and buckets, everything you could ever want or need or never want or need. His underground hardware was a gold mine to the tinkerer or child of depression. He could have bought new, but that's heresy in his anti-prosperity gospel. Living cheap is living humble. Transcendence is to be saved by what's broken. Sanctification sent by self-sufficiency. Grace from going without. Junior was the camel passing through that needle's eye every day. A piece of broken pipe in one hand, rusty wire in the other, his dusty, broken down brogans with the recycled laces, shuffling down that redemption road. One of the things my dad loved most in this world was his garden. He was a vegetable gardener extraordinaire. So I knew that I had to write about that, his love of gardening. And I'll have to do a little hand signal myself in this, because it's written almost as kind of as liturgy. In fact, there are lines taken directly from liturgy. And when I get to those, I'm going to raise my hand. In the book, they are in italics. But the title of the poem is Garden Rite, R-I-T-E. Each spring on his postage stamp of earth, the same rituals. At the first warm breeze, out came the 2x4s, nailed together into a rectangle where he tenderly pushed lettuce seeds into soft mud, draped the airy muslin covering over it all like a communion table waiting for the church bell, stepped back and smiled. Consecrate this crop. The days had to lengthen before the rest could join in. The old rusty push plow of his ancestors, a hoe he had kept from the barn of his boyhood, lifelong tie to the gardens of the dead. It is right to give thanks and praise. He used the creek and tree line in April to sight the straight line that would become, by the hot buzz of August, a choir of corn releasing soft hallelujahs. Beans would be the kneeling women at the altar. Onions, the sour deacons of the doxology. Squash women in yellow bonnets and calico of his youth. Sweet, fat cabbage babies wafting and waving in the blinding sun's light. We are what feeds us. He plunged little crosses in the ground where tomatoes, smeared with stigmata of juicy joy, would shine over the garden. Not a thing wrong with the bread and wine, but a country boy has to have beans. No communion wafer, and let it, no communion wafer unless it was made with ground corn. Let us keep the feast, lift up our hearts. And my father, the high priest of the scriptural lines of his bright, dusty kingdom, giving absolution with green garden gnomes in days of drought, would know precisely when to lift slowly the cloth from that communion table, pinch tender shoots to lay on his tongue, just the tiniest bite. Take, eat, this refuge, this is all our salad days. I realized as I was working on this book that I didn't want all the poems, obviously, to just be about my dad. I wanted this book to be about grief and about surviving grief and about how grief is a natural part of getting older that I had not fully comprehended. Getting older is about a lot of loss. And so as I moved through those years of grieving after he left, I tried to think, how do you survive all of the things that life throws at you at the end? Well, you have to think about what you love and what makes you happy and what strengthens you. And as you can see from behind me by the instrument, one of the things for me is music, has always been, and dancing and that kind of thing. So the book has a lot of poems about music, and I'm going to share one of those with you. I can't do it anymore. I have too many problems, but I used to love to dance to that fiddle music, that good old mountain dancing that we love to do. I even used to win folded money and trophies and things like that. I'd compete, believe it or not. But anyway, this poem is called Why I Dance. It's the lifting, defying the heron's physiology, the whoosh of the heft of all that weight, leaving gravity behind on the creek's glass face that I feel lifted by the fiddler's hand, weightless for that split second when both left and right foot are off the floor. I lift my arms out like a climbing hawk, soaring over the still world beneath, moving through pockets of hot and cool air, floating like a note on evening's breath. My hard heel beats like the woodpecker's beak on the old tree bones beneath me, drumming out the tune's heartbeat in a smiling choir of souls in motion. The fiddler and I lock eyes and smile, wordless, weightless, all at once, joyfully alive in buoyant youth. My feet and his hands together, warbler and chickadee, rising to the desk until the song ends. Only the nightingale's song, ringing long and strong. I'm going to read now from a book that came out in 2016 called The Mad Farmer's Life. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the work of Kentucky poet and novelist and activist Wendell Berry. And he created a wonderful character called the Mad Farmer. And as soon as I read some of those first poems many, many years ago, I said, whoa, I'm married to this guy. So I need to write some poems as the Mad Farmer's wife. So I want to share one of those with you tonight. All of these poems are about living on the farm and about what makes it special to me. Like Mark, I'm a bird watcher and a bird lover, big time. And so is my husband. So it was natural that I wanted to write about my love of birds and how important they are to me. So this poem is called What Birds Say. What birds say, that is what I say too. Red birds dangle like Christmas balls in pines, reminding us of winter's sweet silence. Their wings whisper blood as they sail by. How fragile the unseen bond, clotting everything together. Hummingbirds use sign language to give instruction. So much for gravity and physics and expectations. We are God's calling card. Just follow us right back to him. Bluebirds straddle the birdhouse rooftop, shout again as they fly 1,000 sorties, gathering and feeding and gathering more. Watch them and forget everything that is not blue. Whippoorwills preach persistence, the power of the frantic, the beauty of the trill, that we must always, always sing ourselves into the dark. The hawk lords over us all, barks orders to surrender, kills the weak. Some say the word majestic up at him, but I do not. I never speak to spirits. Only after they are gone, I whisper one word. What the birds say, that is what I say too. I'm going to share a couple of new poems with you now. These poems actually, it's interesting, they were seasonal. I wrote one poem when it was sort of the last of the snow, winter before last, and then about a month or two later, as spring began to come and the bees began to come back, I wrote that. And these two poems were published together in a new magazine called Appalachian Places that ETSU has reconstituted their literary magazine. It's only online, but it's free. And if you haven't checked that out, you should. It's a really fine little magazine. I'm so proud to see that it's back and available. Okay, this one is called, they call it seasonal depression. I remember certain dead on certain kinds of days, often in certain seasons. Sometimes when a particular cloud combines with a particular breeze. Fall rings the church bell of remembrance, annual alarm clock, waking us up just to say, this ends. It is, and then it isn't. Bears sleep, birds leave, trees turn to cadavers. We hunker down in our sweaters with a lovely fire and warm cup. Then it's winter's turn, skeletal and hollow. Only blackbirds line the fence. The world loses its skin and its voice, now a place without sound. The snow comes, so we can track that something actually lives. These two seasons combine into a fifth season called grief, when there is no escape. Hawks soar on rip currents aloft, strong as the river below. So high we are formless down here. But spring does always come, always. It comes, lays a wreath, crosses itself, and moves the world on, having already forgotten the breezes and the blackbirds. The heavy step of all who follow hawks, blessed to wake from this cold dream of a world. Leave this poem by a stream or stump, a smoke signal to the deeply wounded. And then the most fun poem I've written in years is this one that I'm going to share with you. Even though in some ways it has sadness in it, this poem was one of the most wonderful, exhilarating poems I've ever written, because I did not see at all where it was going when I sat down to write it. It just shows you how powerful that mystical force is, whatever it is, that the poem has a mind of its own, and the poem knows what it's doing. This great force that comes from somewhere, this mystical power, I don't know what it is, but this poem wrote itself, and I was astonished by the ending. And so that's just the most fun writing experience you can have. It doesn't happen very often, but this was a great one. And it's called What Bees Say. When I visit the park, my babies ghost it. Little people entertaining each other, blind to the world, so noisy nothing breaks their den. All grown up, far and far away from me now, they no longer breach the silence. It's such a deep quiet. I not only hear, but feel the heavy bee swarm to my right, a white hot energy humming on a low branch. Their loud pulse is a fugue of worry, collective frantic panic. Will we still be us tomorrow? When there's no way back to where we were, we must swarm out on meadow's breath. Bees form their tightest knot when silent air signals that the world is broken. They smother each other with hope once the center is gone. Nature knows well how to rewind, but wastes no energy there. Knows all about recriminations, regrets, the replays and reprisals, but holds their echoes from evening's soft call. No shadows or ghosts in a bee tree or fox den. Stop looking back, tempting a salty fate. The hum says, you were never meant to be a pillar. And I'm going to end with one last poem from the Mad Farmer's Life. This too is a tribute to a family member, but it's also to me a tribute to the senses and to a tribute in a way of just poetry itself, the way poetry works, the magic of it, and how in this case, this poem was triggered just by a smell. And it's fun to think about how certain smells are attached to certain people. It's a very strange thing. But this poem is called Turnips on the Table. How odd when a vegetable and a person merge, becoming one in your mind and mouth. My grandmother loved those little roots. Their stealthy sting hits your tongue like an angry truth. Put all the butter and sugar you want. Their heat cannot be denied. No wonder they're shaped like tears. They owned a little grocery store, could eat anything they wanted. But a hard-scrabbled childhood hangs on you, a bell that can't be unrung. Turnips on the table, a reminder of a hard battle won, a daily bitter tear on the tongue. Thank you all for listening, and thank you for having me.
Rita, Rita, Rita. Oh my goodness. Oh.
Thank you.
Well, here's what I could go on and on. Just a couple of the things that were just, first of all, you had me at gardening is a sacrament. Your tithe paid with hoe and bent back. Oh my gosh. And then, you go on to living cheap is living humble. Then a choir of corn releasing soft hallelujahs. The music of your work is so amazing. It's a mixture of cadence, it's a mixture of alliteration, it's a little bit of repetition, but just I'm always sitting there wherever you are. I'm sitting right there. I can feel it. I can smell it. Like you said, you write the senses, and I appreciate that. And I'm such a part of that. You talk about the hawk who floats like a note on the evening's breath. That's a musician talking right there,
I hope so.
Whippoorwills preach persistence. Do they not? Are they not just whippoorwill, 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 just persistent?
There's lessons all the time. You just got to pay attention. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then I just love the idea of leaving a poem that perhaps someone else who's feeling really down and out might stumble upon and find some strength having come upon it and read it. And I love that. And so I've decided that when I grow up, I want to be you.
Oh.
I want to be you, Rita Quillen.
You need to set your goals higher. You should set higher. But thank you so much. I am very touched by that. Very awesome. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Rita, so much for being with us tonight. It's just delightful.
I appreciate it.
Well, we have one more absolutely wonderful person with us this evening, and I'm thrilled beyond words. Maurice Manning has published 7 books of poetry. His most recent book is Rail Splitter, though tonight he will be reading from his upcoming collection, a manuscript titled Rain Crow, Scarecrow, and are we not the luckiest to be able to hear this work? Even before it comes to publication. A Pulitzer Prize finalist and former Guggenheim Fellow, Manning teaches at Transylvania University and lives with his family in Kentucky. So in reality, Maurice and I have not even met on social media. We have exchanged some emails, but I have had the pleasure of seeing him read on social media. He did not know I was there stalking him. So the pleasure was meeting him tonight right before we began our program this evening, but I have admired his work forever, as have so many others. So while I was reaching out, trying my best to get in touch with Maurice, every person I talked to simply had to tell me about how incredibly kind and modest he is. So I'm going to share that with all of you too, so that you will know that. And the word gifted came up a lot. But from all that I can find out about Maurice, and in my own estimation, it would seem to me that beyond the gift is a very hardworking poet who loves his craft. And I really cannot adequately express the joy I experienced when I reached out and Maurice agreed to read for us. I'm truly beside myself to have the honor of welcoming Maurice Manning.
Thank you, Kari. Thank you, Devin and Adam at Stewart's Opera House. Thank you, Mark and Rita, for your wonderful words. I think, Rita, I was thinking back, I believe the last time you and I were in the same place at the same time was about 16 years ago, Appalachian Writers Conference in Hindman, Kentucky, at the Hindman Settlement School, which some of you may know was seriously damaged in the flooding we had here in Kentucky about 8 weeks ago. And to our sign language interpreters, Joe and Allie, thank you. I'm going to start with a little tune. To a barn with nothing in it. The freedom to imagine a mule or a bony jack, as some would put it, worn out and good only for yoking to colt mules until they learn the burden must be shared and shall be borne with knowledge that enters the eyes in time to sit there behind the eyes at the back of the long amused face, below the long ears flick. That jack, led by its own will, entered the open door of the barn one day and stood in the shadows, slotted with light, as a flood of rain scratched the roof and loose metal banged in the wind, and the barn became a banjo, and the jack, pleased with the transformation, became the soul of music itself. There was an old woman. The old woman whose eyes turned blue and brightened in her later years, who'd say, "Why, laws, honey, tell me just what you've been a-knowing good." I can hear her voice still singing like a stream, and sometimes all I do is hear it, as if it's calling me or offering a sound that's gone, but ought to be remembered, because her voice belonged to the time and place of people speaking to one another, and speaking held the people together. This is how our speaking sounds, our tongue, but also this is what we say. Just what you've been a-knowing good says plainly there are things in the world to know and be glad for knowing them. But hearing the voice of someone steady, delighted, slightest thing is always the voice I want to hear, because it's the voice of belonging to time, a sound made to pierce time and therefore enter and there to belong. And that must make our string of days vital and artfully entwined with everything, as in a story. And that's what I've been a-knowing good. Instead of saying often or oft, she preferred to say a heap of times. If all we had was a meager meal, it was her habit to declare the fair and elegant sufficiency. One afternoon when we stopped by to visit another old woman who made it to 108, whose voice was even older, she asked, "Aunt Clara, don't you want your supper? We may be a-hindering you." Aunt Clara said, "Well, I don't want no supper long as we can talk." I answer long after the question of what I've been a-knowing good with this book of tales and with these voices that belong to time and spoke to me and claimed me as the listener and thus the one to write them down to you, another listener, may hear them too, and so belong. And here we find ourselves. together. Some of you are old enough to have played the card game Rook, and there's a version of the game called Dixie Rook. That's where the title of this poem comes from, Playing Dixie Rook. I remember playing Dixie Rook one night with an older boy named Docky and his mother, Zonnie, and some man Miss Zonnie knew named Brack, and Miss Zonnie cheated right through and slapped the table when the deck was done. Miss Zonnie said if we'd been playing for nickels, Docky and I would be broker than a pissant's matchstick in the wind. And Docky answered with the truth, why, hell, Mammy, we're broke already. We're poorer than a pissant's toe, and so is everyone around. Miss Zonnie cleared her throat and said, Docky, you'd better watch your mouth. And Docky turned his face in strange contortion, trying to see his mouth. I'm trying my damnedest to raise you right. His weary mother sighed and spit. And I'll not have you talk that away. This here's a strictly Christian home, and I won't have no cussing in it. Hell's bells, we're sitting on the porch, was Docky's not so wise reply. Miss Zonnie slapped the back of his head. Hell is real, Miss Zonnie, I offered. I've heard the preachers preach against it. I'd allow the boys are right, said Brack. Just look around. If this ain't hell, we can't be far from such a place. I looked around. Chickens pecked at bugs in the grass. The dew had dropped and the moon was peeping over the ridge. I'd say it's farther away than you think, I said. The chickens aren't in torment. There ain't a hell for chickens, son, said Brack. Only hell that is for us. That's right, Miss Zonnie said. It's only a hell for us. Besides, a chicken don't know what's right or wrong, and God don't saddle the critters with the plight. But a boy had better get it right. Why, Mammy, you just rhymed, said Docky. I never meant to, honey. I say sometimes it just comes out that way. Now there you go again. You cheated, Rook. You hit me in the head. You won't let me cuss on the porch, and now you've turned to rhyming, Docky said. By God, what kind of mammy are you? The kind who's gonna love the hell right out of you, Miss Zonnie said. And as for cheating, honey, listen. There's no end of cheating in this world, but every wickedness that is begins when someone tries to cheat and thinks he can get away with it. And sometimes, honey, that's what happens. History laid bare. The Binges were a rangy bunch, owing no doubt to Burr Binge's approach to animal husbandry. The chickens roamed in and out of the house at their pleasure and roosted on the spires of the old pump organ Burr propped in the parlor, and clearly Burr amused himself at naming daughters. The big one was Delight, but Burr just called her Light Binge. The more comely daughter was History. I don't mind saying that I was sweet on History Binge, but just like Delight, History was only her given name. Burr Binge called her Hissy. Burr, Light, and Hissy Binge. In school one day, I asked Hissy if she liked music. Music, she said. Why, honey, music's my middle name. History Music Binge, I wondered. Now, no, it's just an expression, hoss. If you come see me Sunday, I'll play that organ for you and sing a tune. So I received her invitation. Sunday seemed a long way off, and during the wait, I found myself sunk in the throes of pondering my future with fair History, who was fresher than a fritter cake. When I got to the Binge home place, the door was open and a chicken ran out in the yard and dusted its feathers. I called out, Hissy, it's me, Hoss. Come in, honey, I'm in the parlor. When I got there, she was pumping the organ in her bare feet. And all the rest of Hissy Binge was also bare. And her hair was shining on her shoulders. It was useless to avert my eyes. She sat on a red velvet cushion, pumping and playing a tune I knew, and 6 chickens bobbed in time from the lofty reaches of the organ. My God, Hissy, what's going on? I blubbered, barely believing the scene. Oh, Hoss, it's just the way we do it here, out here. Do what? I ventured. Honey, it's how we get the chickens to lay. The music puts them in the mood, can't you see? And then Hissy intoned, I will sing to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown. When she finished, an elevated chicken clucked and a rolling sound began cascading through the organ pipes, and presently into a basket nestled by Hissy's pretty feet there landed triumphantly an egg. I can't believe any of this is happening, Hissy. Is it real? My father is old Burr Binge, and this is my father's house. His ways are rare, but plump as a feather pillow with mystery, and honey, he's wily. This organ is nothing but providence. Can't you see it as a symbol? You've allowed temptation to flatter you, and doesn't it make you feel unhinged? Poor honey Hoss, you've gone astray and didn't know where you were going. Hissy coyly turned her head. Now, everything you've seen today, from the chicken dusting her wings in the yard to the open door, from this old organ to my bright body, even the teary gospel tune, it's all my father's concoction. Burr Binge is only the artist of this place, but he wanted me to give you something, honey, a dream you'll never forget. And isn't that what history is? An endless dream you can't forget. And can't you hear the music in it? A compendium of knowledge. Widow Sparks was a character, a smallish woman who still had all of her teeth and didn't mind to brag on herself about it. And everywhere she went, she walked with a black umbrella. And following expected custom for a woman in mourning, she only wore a black dress when she went out. The days of veils were pretty much over, so she didn't fool with any of that. She was as cheerful as she could be. She had a big voice, and when she laughed, she cackled like a guinea hen. We were talking once when I came by, and it just seemed right for me to ask how widowhood was treating her and if she needed anything. Don't need a thing, honey, she said, and being a widder has sparked up my sleep. Tater Sparks was bad to snore, sawinest man I ever heard, and he was high on the list of lazy, and a fence post did more talking than Tater Sparks and passed him by on smarts and was better company to boot. Why, sometimes I'd kick him square in the shin just to hear him holler ouch. He was a sorry excuse for a man, puzzle-gutted, worse than a bunion, useless as tits on a boar hog, and I don't miss that man a bit. The no-good so-and-so. Sounds like you shouldn't have married him in the first place, I said, and chuckled. We didn't have the choices then all the women have nowadays. If a feller ambled over the hill to ask your pappy for your hand, there wasn't a thing to do but give it. Sounds like a rabbit trap, I said. Just jerk the string and the box comes down. Well, I didn't stay in the trap for long, she said. Just long enough to get my babies raised, and I would say that both of them are following their bony father's footsteps, if there was anything to follow. Tater Sparks was not a man to leave a path in the world behind him. The spark of curiosity he sorely lacked, despite his name. But I reckon his parents didn't have much ambition for their only child, naming him after a vegetable, and not one of distinction either. I'm sorry marriage was disappointing for you, I said. It must have been lonely. Well, I made out, she said, because after I had my babies, I got me this big old book in the mail that's called A Compendium of Knowledge, and read it backwards and forwards, cover to cover, and soaked up all the knowledge that's in it like a sponge. And don't you know a sponge is a critter? Yep, it's in the book. All that knowledge kept me happy, and now that I'm free of Tater Sparks, I'm going everywhere I can to try it out because, honey, this is a world that needs some knowledge in it. There's a heap of folks disposed, I reckon, like Tater Sparks, but it ain't no claim for disposition if you ask me, just sitting there too lazy to scratch an itch, dumb as a coal bucket. But at least a bucket's good for something. Well, needless to say, I found the story the widow told convincing and wise. I was glad to know what a book can do, and it tickled me that she made a pun out of her late husband's name. Excuse me, she made two of them. 2 puns for Tater Sparks, so lately gone to his reward. Sorry, I'm checking my time here. Yeah, I'm gonna read the next 2 in the list that the interpreters have. Why Pearlie Kept the Weasel. Well, everybody got together one night down at the mouth of the cave and just had the best time ever. Duke Belcher had gone fishing that day, but hadn't had a bite. Little had just got over the scours and didn't want to eat. Nellie Creech was sweetening up to Eldon Slate and flirting like a little hen, but Eldon was either in one of his moods or more likely too ninny-headed and dense to notice the prettiest girl around was ready to put on her apron and settle, which is just as well because Eldon is not a very capable man, and I expect he knows it too. He needs a woman to lead him around, and Nellie Creech is not that kind. She wants a man to fuss and fawn all over her, and Eldon lacks the spark for anything like that. Arliss Binge said he remembered the time his cousin Bald swallowed a shooting marble, and it took nearly a week before it came out the other end of Bald, and Bald had done his business in a bucket in order to retrieve the marble, and after that, Arliss and Bald were shy on marbles for a while, but Bald had saved the marble all these years and liked to say it was a marble that had been somewhere. Meanwhile, Granny and I were stringing a mess of beans, and she saved the strings to feed to the chickens because a chicken is not a picky critter when it comes to eating things, and the string of a bean to a chicken is high living indeed. Then Verge recalled the night he slept in the chicken coop and trapped the awfulest weasel you ever saw and put it in a sack, determined he would drown the old egg sucker, but then he thought he'd play a prank on Pearlie Patch on account of Pearlie being such a sourpuss and all about the world. So Verge went over one day when Pearlie was taking a nap on the porch and introduced the weasel to Pearlie's open overalls. And Pearlie invented a dance right there. And soon everybody around caught on and was doing a dance they called the Pearlie Patch Weasel Stomp. And Pearlie was pleased at last to be the origin of something good in the world. And the weasel had cured him from being the sourpuss he used to be, and it changed his outlook because the meaning of his life had arrived. And Pearlie, not known as a lettered man, sat down one day and wrote a book he called The Way of the Weasel, and dedicated it to Verge for saving him from perdition and doom, by which time Pearlie had introduced the weasel to a feather pillow beside the one he used himself, and was calling the weasel Earl the Pearl, asserting some sort of kinship only Pearlie himself could fathom or cipher. And Verge said Earl was quite the weasel and was glad he hadn't drowned the critter. Finally, Granny yawned and said in her high old quavering voice, "If we're not careful, we might sit right here all night, children, and then we'd be good for nothing come tomorrow. Honey, don't forget them strings. It's a pure misery to jilt a chicken and have it to droop and mope about, pining and puny for a string," she said to me, and I followed her from the cool of the cave into the house and into the tall dream she gave me. Last one. There's going to be a mention in the poem of these items. These are pawpaws for anybody out there interested. I've got a whole vessel of pawpaws. We're going to make muffins this weekend. Why poor old mama took to bed. If it hadn't been for poke and pawpaws and hot water cornbread pones, all of us would have starved. The year poor mama took to her sick bed and lay there a withering away to nothing. She said her nerves had worn in too, and she was about give out from all of us children, but the last one coming out with 11 toes sapped her spirit, and she was spent like a $2 bill, and climbed into bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin, allowed her eyes to water, and put on a mournful face. The doctor gave her 6 weeks, but mama carried on and clung to life for 27 years. Though some were spent in stony sleep. After about 9 of those years of fretful grief and near starvation, Pappy stood in her door and declared, "There lies heaped up in that bed the smoldering embers of our passion." I told her 11 children, woman, is plenty of critters for any home. But odd numbers gave her the willies, and she said we ought to make it a dozen. So I complied and performed the act of marital bliss as she requested. It was the 12th one, Hack, that broke her. When he come out right away, she saw he had 6 toes on his little left foot. "Pappy, fetch your pocket knife," she said, and had me cut off the toe. Little Hack never made a whimper, and I'll be danged, but the toe grew back. She had me cut it off again and again, but the toe kept growing back. And I said, "Woman, I reckon Hack is determined to have 6 toes on his foot." It was her understanding, though, that 11 toes must be a sign our Hack was born with a fiend in him, and the toe was an implement of doom. But if Hack had a fiend, it never showed. After a spell of time, I pleaded, "Hecky, Hack appears to be a normal 11-toed boy, and I see no evidence of a fiend." "Well, just you wait," she said and shuddered. 11 toes ain't normal at all. No telling what that boy'll do. There was no persuading her. Hecky, my dear bride, had set her mind like a bear trap and sprung it shut. About 3 years into Mama's decline, we decided we'd had enough of poke and pawpaws and cornbread pones. So we branched out to grits and collards and squirrels. And one day, Pappy made a tent for the butter beans, and soon lean times for us was over. Young Hack turned out to be just fine. By 3, he'd taught himself to read and studied every book he could find on fiends, declaring one day there was no connection in any book he'd read on the subject between 11 toes and a fiend. Perhaps Mama has been swayed, alas, by spurious superstition, he wondered. "That boy's a-talking above my head, and the critter's only 3, Pappy shouted. "No telling what he'll have to say as he goes on." "Well, sir, I've got a poem, Pappy," Hack said with a knowing wink. "My name is Hack, and here's my fix. I got 5 on one, and the other's got 6. They chopped one off, but it grew right back, which must be why they named me Hack. My mama likes to moan and mourn, but mama, it's just how I was born. 11 toes, 11 toes. I'm just a boy with 11 toes. I got 2 blue eyes and a runny nose and 2 bare feet with 11 toes." Well, Pappy just beamed. "Hecky," he hollered, "if this boy's got a fiend in him, I reckon it's on the side of good. A bad one couldn't make a poem and carry on with all that rhyming. We've got a rhymer on our hands, that's all, Hecky. Our Hack's a rhymer with 11 toes. Why, he may be the only rhymer in the world that's got 11 toes. It stands a chance, woman. Our Hack might shake the world and shine it up." And that's how Pappy left it all, when Mama had years to go in bed before she sat up in it and died. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. How wonderful was that, everybody? Oh my goodness. Gosh, Maurice, for me to say I'm a fan is an understatement. And I'm sure everybody who is listening can understand as well. I love the way you introduce and build your characters. It's a cross between poetry and elaborate storytelling, and your language is so rich and so full of the old ways and the old sounds. And I noticed Rita posted about that as well. The idea of the lesson, the music and the voices of our elders that the young people don't like anymore, can't hear. The poem, I think you said something like, a sound that's gone but ought to be remembered, of a time and place, of people speaking to one another, and speaking held the people together. And I'm thinking about today, it's only been a couple years since I left teaching, and on campus, there's no eye contact. It's all on the phone. People in the same room text each other. They won't even get up and cross the room to talk to each other, you know. And a statement like, and speaking held the people together, is just so forceful and so genius and just amazing. And the way you turn a poem, with a flood of rain, the barn became a banjo. Oh my God, and I could hear it. And the mule, pleased with the transformation, became the soul of music itself. Oh my gosh, no wonder the Pulitzer nomination. I mean, my goodness, and the Guggenheim. And I know you hate me saying all this. I get it. I know. I've been told. Just a couple more things. Let's see. I loved when you talked about Docky, he and his buddy being broker, then piss ants, then a piss ant's matchstick in the wind. I mean, because that's just hilarious. And Tater Sparks, a sorry excuse for a man, puzzle gutted worse than a bunion. I just love it. It's so rich and thick. Everything that you do is just so, it's just rich and thick is what I have to say about it. And I love every word is just so perfect. So thank you for all of that, Maurice. What a treat for us all tonight to hear all of that. So I would like to invite everyone, Mark and Rita, to turn on your video, and we're just going to have a little question session real quick. If anybody in our audience wants to put a question in the Q&A or in the chat window, I will be glad to answer your question. And be sure to look in the chat, everybody, because it just says how much everybody has loved this evening. Real quick, I want to say that my book can be ordered through Swallow Press at Ohio University. Mark's, Karine, can be ordered through origamipoems.com, and Rita's on her website, ritasimsquillen.com, and Maurice's books can be the Rail Splitter, in particular, Copper Canyon Press. Maybe one of the first questions I should ask is, Maurice, where can we get, or when can we expect to get Rain Crow Scarecrow?
I have no idea. Unfortunately, you know, it's just, it really, I haven't even sent the manuscript to Copper Canyon, so I don't want to be a horn tooter, but a friend of mine and I are trying to develop a podcast, and we're going to have some of these poems and songs kind of together, recorded on site in historical places. And I can, Kari, once we're ready to make that thing public, I'll let you know, and you can send it around. And that's free. That's going to be totally free. So, but yeah.
Wonderful. And I would appreciate that. And I promise I will. I'll send it all around on social media. And I bet you Mark and Rita will help as well.
For sure.
We'll love that. Well, okay. So Mark, I thought maybe you might want to just tell folks about One Art and your philosophy behind One Art, and then maybe how people might be able to submit if they're interested in sending you work.
For sure. Thank you. And thank you, Rita and Maurice, for being here. This is a lovely evening. Before I say that, I want to say this is kind of funny. Growing up on the East Coast, but having spent time in Appalachia, like you throw in Appalachia, that's how you remember it, right? And people where I grew up say Appalachian. And it's I do know how to code switch, and I'm resisting doing it because it's first of all, we're virtual, and also I should just admit myself as a city boy. Not that I ever actually successfully put one over on people elsewhere. But let me talk about One Art for a minute. So One Art was started in 2020, just because at that point it felt like, I'd finally reached a place where I was ready to be an editor on my own. So it was just timing. It was not the pandemic. A lot of journals came up in 2020 as a result of the pandemic. And there's info on the style on the website about style and things like that. oneartpoetry.com. I do have an affinity for minimalism and concision and precise language. There's definitely a host of poets that I could name, but I'll resist. Who are sort of indicative of the style that I look for. There are things that are going to be a difficult sell, I should say, are poems that use a lot of white space, just like movement around the page. That's partially just formatting is a challenge for me. A little bit, I'll admit myself again, is because just I've done this website design on my own, and I'm not a professional coder or anything quite like that. Anyway, I don't know what else would be helpful to hear.
You might mention how people can submit, like go to your website and
So I try to be as friendly as humanly possible. Just I try to think with my editor's hat on as a writer as well. And so really you can just email directly, like oneartpoetry@gmail. And your choice, body of the email, attachment, you can introduce yourself and do a little note, but you don't have to. And you can call me whatever you wish. It doesn't have to be anything super formal. I'm try to be a good sport. And my consulting editor, Louisa Steinman, is also a big influence on the operation. So that's important to keep in mind.
Absolutely. And as with many small presses, you do nominate for Best of the Net and for Pushcart. And that's something people need to know as well. So, and thank you so much, Mark. And just one more little question. They wanted to know, in addition to being a terrific writer, you're a wonderful artist and photographer. Did you want to talk a minute about that?
Oh, that's really sweet. A few people have been kind enough to I guess give me some accolades for my photography, which has been an interest since I was a teenager. And when I was young, people would say I had a good eye, and I appreciate that. And I like to have fun with it, and I definitely intentionally did not make it professional, and I wanted to keep it fun.
I hear you. I got my master's in photography and immediately started hating it. I couldn't take a
Oh,
picture anymore without worrying about whether everything was perfect, you know.
wait, tell us more. Tell us
Yeah,
more.
well, I've gotten over it, so that's all good. But thank you, Mark, so much. I'm
Oh,
so glad to know all of that. And uh, so, Miss Rita, you probably know where I'm coming here. So the question I've had from so many people is, will there be a third in your series? Are you working on a new book? And if I'm putting you on the spot, then just ignore the question. Just tell me kind of where you're going next. Maybe that's a way for you to segue into something there.
No, I don't have another novel in the works right now. I don't feel I'm not moved in that direction at all. I don't know why. Who knows? You never say never. Like I said, I have been writing a few new poems, but not, and I'm working on a new song right now that's got me, it's giving me fits. But I hope to finish that soon. But I'm not really writing all that much now, and that's okay. I've always worked that way in fits and starts. I'm not one of these dedicated, disciplined people. I like to do a lot of different things. And so I sort of drift from time to time. But I hope as long as I live that I'll always at least try to write poems, because I think that's the most fun of everything I do that's creative. When you're writing a poem and it actually works, that's just the most exhilarating thing ever.
Amen to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, well, wonderful, wonderful. And then, Maurice, my question for you was, as I was researching and looking online at some of your work, I was drawn to the fact that Companion to Owls was a collection of poems in the voice of Daniel Boone. And I thought everything I read said it also had a whole lot of details about the real life, the world of Daniel Boone. And I apologize, I just haven't had time to read that book. It's on my stack. And I think you all know what all of our stacks look like, right? But anyway, I thought it would be really interesting if you could just share a few tips about how you went about researching a project like that, because it must have taken a great deal of time and you must have had a passion for it to begin with, or did you stumble upon it? I mean, how did that happen?
Well, that's a great question. I should say that my most recent book, The Voice of Abraham Lincoln. So I feel like I've covered historical figures who have ties to Kentucky. The two that have interested me most in my lifetime. I think after my first book, which was fairly personal in its way, and I sort of, got the coming of age kind of deal out of my system, I thought, what's the next thing? And one of the things that has been part of my life, even from early childhood, was a sense of Kentucky history. And I just have had a lifelong fascination with the pioneers and that all of that history. And so I started doing a little research on Boone and realized all kinds of stuff that, escaped the sort of 2-paragraph synopsis of his life. And I then, of course, just started thinking, well, this is a person associated with the foundation of this place we call our country. And in his lifetime, he was rejected and mistreated and cheated by the so-called system of his time. And I began to sort of think, well, that's part of our history. That might be the truer part of our history than all this heroic junk that most of us get in our history classes in school. It turned out to be immensely immersive research. And I'm not a professional with academic research, so I, of course, didn't have an efficient way to do it, but I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And then many years later, when I go to do this rail splitter in the voice of Daniel Boone, you can't turn around in the bookstore without running into a book about Abraham Lincoln. And I realized immediately I cannot go into the catacombs of research about Abraham Lincoln. So I kept that short, relatively short, but I happened to live 40 miles from where Lincoln was born. And his parents actually were married in the county where I live. So I did, that was a whole different kind of work, walking on the ground where he went. A friend of mine, some of this is relatively obscure, but Lincoln had an older sister who died before he was born. So a sister he never actually knew. And she is buried not too far from here. And her grave is in the middle of a cow pasture. And a friend of mine took me there a couple of years ago and toured me around on, the back roads, Lincoln stuff, Lincoln family stuff. Very, very, I'm drawn to both a figure like Boone and a figure like Lincoln because of the humble origins and what they made of themselves. I still find it deeply moving.
Golly, thanks so much. Wow, I can imagine going down, like you say, that rabbit hole of just finding out more and more, and the fascination become, more charged with each discovery. We have to thank you for that, to have some real history instead of what whoever does those history books decide that we should know. I love that. I wonder if any of you have any questions for each other. Anything you thought that you might like to ask Maurice or Mark or Rita, any of you? No? Okay, that's fine. Anybody want to, I hate this because it's such a cliche, but it's, Mark, you mentioned this. Do you want to mention a couple of your favorite poets or novelists or musicians, just so people are aware and can maybe look them up? Anybody interested in doing that?
I could do that a little. This is always a bit of reluctance because then you don't want to.
Okay, you can have 5. How's that?
Well, so here's the question: people that I like, or people that I want to read in the style of.
How about people that inspire you? How's that?
That's hard. That's shifted a lot over the years. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of places. Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson has been a big inspiration. Camus, Emile Cioran, E.M. Cioran, the disciple of Nietzsche. His aphorisms I'm a big fan of. For poetry, I think if people read a lot of Jane Kenyon, they'll get a sense of what I like. um, Jane Kenyon's Happiness, um, Naomi Shihab Nye's The Art of Disappearing,
Mm-hmm.
Ada Limon I've been a huge fan of, and I really hoped to see her become poet laureate just in my lifetime, and I'm very, very pleased that it happened fast.
Yeah, we are really lucky, aren't we? Yep.
Yeah, I feel very lucky and
Yeah.
very happy. It was on my bucket list, so I'm really fulfilled now.
Yeah. Maurice or Rita, do you want to mention a couple favorites or inspirations or?
Oh gosh, I have so many. I don't know where to start. I thought I would just throw in a plug for some of my press mates at Madville. Some books that have come out recently from that old press that are really good is the writers are Pauletta Hansel and Susan Underwood. Those are two poets. Well, Susan is also a novelist.
Right.
If you don't know their work, that's two you should look up and read. I just think they're awfully talented and really good writers. Linda Parsons, who is the poetry editor for Madville, is just, I think, one of the most amazing and an underrated poet. She deserves to be much more widely known than she is.
Mm-hmm. Treasure.
Yeah, and also there's a poet down in Oak Ridge, an older lady that probably a lot of people don't know, is Connie Jordan Green.
Is one of my favorites too.
Marvelous poet, just full of grace and magic. She's wonderful. So those are just some names that maybe you have never heard of before that are really, really fine poets, and I hope you'll check them out. So.
Thank you, Rita. I think those are all exceptional choices. Maurice, how about you?
I'm a big fan of Robert Penn Warren's poetry. He wrote a bunch of novels, including All the King's Men, that a lot of people know, but a lot of his poetry is really very moving and powerful. James Still, some of you may recall, was a mentor to me, and so I'm very close to his memory and to his work as very much one of the very first people to write about the Appalachian region with dignity and love and wit. A great eye for the natural world and reverence, not just for the whole of it, but for the detail of nature. I'd like Rita, I want to put in a plug for folks in the region who are doing great work right now. I would say Marianne Worthington has a newish book out called The Girl Singer. She's a friend, so I do have a bias, but she's terrific, and that's a great book.
It's on my stack.
And that's a lovely cover too.
Wonderful. Mark, did you want to put in a plug for a couple of your favorites that submit to one?
I'm really reluctant actually to play favorites, but the analytics do a nice job. So I've been posting the most read authors each month, the top 10. And as long as people don't cheat the system and just click out their name repeatedly, that'll keep being kind of a cool thing. Yeah.
I love that. And that's true. If you want to know who is doing well at one art, you can literally, he has the analytics and you can look it up. So it's really pretty darn cool. It's just a different way of tracking all of it. So thank you, Mark, for all of that. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Is there anything else anybody wanted to share? No? Okay, well, I will say I look forward to seeing everyone at our next event, which is October the 20th. And I will host the 2021 Ohio Poet of the Year, Cortez Harris. And, wait for it, the 2022 Pulitzer Prize winning poet, Diane Seuss. I'm very excited about that. She's a lovely person. Again, someone who I've gotten to know online. And I will be coming to you from the Dodge Poetry Festival, where I'll be a featured festival poet this year. So that's a lot of excitement for me. I'm just hoping I get there in time to do it. If not, Devin will be your host. So thanks again to all who came out tonight and those who will watch our program later on YouTube. I want to thank Devin and our ASL interpreters and all the fine folks at Stewart's Opera House, and Maurice and Rita and Mark for being here tonight. Be safe, everyone, until we meet again.
Thank you. Good night.